Hey y'all, so this video is for anyone trying to get started in Substance Painter, which is an Adobe product. They purchased it from Allegorithmic a few years back, and it is what most industry standard artists use these days to paint in 2D textures onto 3D objects. So for a 10-second overview, previously Photoshop was kind of the go-to texturing tool where you would paint things in a flat capacity and then try to roll them back up and make the UV seams match on your 3D object. Substance Painter came into being the most popular tool because you don't need to paint on that flat 2D surface. You can actually paint onto the 3D object itself, and then it will handle the math on how everything lays out into a UV. So to jump in here very quickly, once you open up Substance Painter, you can go to File, New, File Open for any of your existing files, as well as open a sample. So what I'm going to do is open up a sample, and we'll just do Meet Matte. So this is a basic sample object that they have in here. Once it's in here, you have a bunch of ways that you can interact with it and paint on this surface. And everything works in a capacity of layers, just like Photoshop. So to go over the UI very quickly, we have your ability to paint with a brush. If you hold it down, you get your other types of paints, etc. for all of these. You have eraser, you have paint on a spline, you have your projection tool, you have polygon fill. So if you want to, you can actually just select the polygons you want to apply certain materials or textures to. A smudge brush, a clone stamp tool, a material picker, etc. So think of this very much like a Photoshop, but all working in 3D. Up at the top, you have all of the current settings for the tool that you have open. So this is size, flow, stroke opacity, spacing, etc. To the right of that, you have the different panels that you can use. So if you want to view this in 3D only, you can do that. I like the 3D and 2D view because then you could paint either on the 2D or you can paint on the 3D and you can see how it works on the other side. Control Z backs you out of all of that. You're immediately in the painting window. If you want to get into bake your textures or your maps rather, you want to go to this croissant, which is a clever little icon. Once you're in here, you're going to hit Bake Selected Textures. So once you've pulled in a new asset, none of this is baked. And that means that if you apply something like a smart material that has a lot of intelligence, it's going to attempt to use based on the baked maps that you've created. It will not work until you have baked your textures. And I can show you what that looks like as well at some point. So these textures are already baked, which is great. It gives you everything from material ID maps to world space normals to normal. And you can see up here that we have 3 different texture sets, meaning we have 3 materials on this asset. The last little button up here is the camera for the render. So this is their built-in iRay renderer tool that they have. There's a small mention in the bottom right corner that we just missed with my video over it that said iRay warming up. And basically, this is going to work just like a render in a Maya Arnold, in a Keyshot, in a Marmoset toolkit, whatever it might be. And you can get in here and start to play with things. You also have the ability to change up like what type of skybox you're using, as well as a light and how it's going to be moving around the object. So all of those are shortcuts. Like this is shift and hold down right click and move left and right to change where the sun is facing. You can get into a lot of really good settings here. So I'm going to go back into Paint. And speaking of settings, we have a lot of settings over here on the right. So again, these are our 3 main materials. You can see the maps that are in here, and you can see the layers beneath that I will paint on. But first, let's take a look at these settings. So this goes into display settings. So if I want to see the environment, I can pull it up. I can pull the blur way down if we want to see exactly what environment it is. And we can make a bunch of different changes from within here. I can also come down here, and if I wanted this to include something like opacity. Opacity is one of the supported channels, but it doesn't come in by default. So this, if you change to this material in here, or this shader, it will then support you painting in alpha. You have other things that we will not get too deep into in this very brief overview video. A history node so you can jump forward and back, and a log. So one of the most important things to me is, let's say I bring this up. I'm going to exit out of the substance assets window in the bottom right because it's not that relevant and I'm covering it up anyways. So here we have our brush and we have its properties. So I'm going to move my window over here to the right. So with this brush, you can change things like size and a few of the things that you can do up here at the top. But we can also add in new layers. So the way that most artists will work in Photoshop or Substance is in a non-destructive way if possible. So let's say I want to create just a new fill layer. So I can create a new fill layer. I can turn the base color to red, let's just say. And because I'm on the head, it's only applying to that head. Because I have 3 different materials, it will save out as 3 separate texture sets. But then I can come in here and say, I don't really like the red on a few spots. So I could right click it, add a white mask, and then I can come into this mask and I can start to paint from a black to white scale what I want to keep. So if you know Photoshop, you'll know exactly what's happening is that I'm masking out the red. So that's how that's going to work, is that you can work with masks and a bunch of other really cool things in here. I noticed that it has a color ID map. So the other thing that I could do would be, let's say I do another film. In this one, I'm going to say, I'll impact the red. You can see that these are the channels that I've chosen to be able to impact here: color, metal, rough, normal, and height. If I want to change what all I can impact from here, I can come in and do that under texture set settings. And underneath channels, I can add in a channel here for other types of channels that I want to support. So let's say I come in here, I'll make this one blue and I'll make it super metallic. And then I want to come in here and I want to right click and say add mask with color selection. So now what I can do, because it picked up the ID mask that it baked when this got pulled in, is I can grab the color picker and I can say I want this green part here in the ID mask to be the mask that is being used to fill that color selection. You can see I can also rotate my canvas around, among many other things. So that's an example of how to work with this. So the red looks a bit more plasticky, the blue looks a bit more metallic. Again, because all of the maps are baked out, I can pretty easily come over here and get into smart materials. So the far left over here is materials. Next to that are smart materials that again use a lot of really intricate kind of algorithms and math to generate things like dirt and hole damage along curves that it's generated in the maps. So let's say I want to allocate something like machinery to the body. I'm just going to drag that over onto the body, and it tries to use the curves to kind of know where things ought to go. The other nice thing is that I can come into this machinery smart material, which has a bunch of sub-materials in it that they've built out. And I can start to change things, like if I don't really want the dust to be that intense or I want to change the roughness, I can start to do that. And let's say in the rust, I scroll up here and I find that I want to tile this a bit more. You can see I can start to play with exactly what that looks like. So that's the idea, is that you have a bunch of control inside of here that you can get into and play around with. What you'll typically do at the end is export your materials or textures. So let me drag one more smart material here onto the base just so that we have something interesting. Let's make it something a bit more different than anything in the scene already. Perfect. So we have all of that. Now I can go into File, Export Textures, and I can export this to wherever I want. So let's say I export it right there. I'm going to hit export, and I've already indicated what type of export I want it to be. If I needed to change this, I can go into the template. So right now it's just going to use document channels, normal, and AO. I could come in here and let's say I needed to export this to the Unity high definition render pipeline. I would find Unity HD render pipeline, metallic standard, and then I can export it. So now from here, it's going to push all of those maps out. And the nice thing is, whenever I open up my File Explorer, the maps that it has created for me are all going to slot straight into a scene in Unity where this can work just fine. So what I'm also going to do is do a file export after I exit out of that, and I'll export the mesh. Once you have this window open, you want to make sure that you indicate whatever type of file you want to export as. I'm going to do an FBX. All right, so now that I'm in Unity, I can go to new scene. We'll just open up a basic indoors scene. Let's say I want to grab everything in the Unity material ball, turn that off. Let's go ahead and pull in our model. So we have our meat mat FBX. Then I have my textures that are going to come through as well. So those textures have now all imported. I have meat mat. I'm going to throw meat mat in here. Pull them up. Let's go ahead and lock the scale, turn it to 10 by 10 by 10. Bring it down. And I'm going to rotate them just a bit. All right. So now I can come over here and just create materials. There are various ways to do this, like extracting materials from the mesh itself. But I'm just going to create 3 new ones so that y'all can see exactly what we're doing. It looks like there's already a body in here, so I'm just going to call it body 1. Create new material, call it head. And create new material and call it base. So now I can come over into base, drag it over, body 1, drag it over, and head, drag it over. If I grab head, I can then lock out my inspector here, change the view that I have here into a list, which will help me just to grab the right things. And I can grab my head base map, my head mask map, and my head normal map. Now with your normal maps, you are still going to want to go in here and unlock that and change these all over to normal map in the texture settings. If I go into body next, I can get back to that material from here, lock this out, and grab my body base map, body mask map, and body normal map. And then lastly, I'm going to unlock. Go ahead and drag the base map, mask map, and normal map. So now inside of Unity, we have something relatively similar. You can see some post-processing already set up as a bloom with that metallic blue kind of reflecting this light. Some really interesting stuff already happening. So that's the idea. You get it into Unity. Once it's in Unity, you can continue playing around with it, especially with the sliders that you have over here to kind of ramp off metallic or smoothness if something doesn't look quite right to you. Get in, keep playing with it, etc. So the beauty of Substance Painter is that you do all of this material work in Painter, you export the raster textures, and then that can be iterated on inside of Unity. If you wanted to export a procedural material where you can have ultimate scaling up and down, more similar to something like a vector graphic, that would be where Substance Designer would come in. Happy to do a tutorial on that in the future, but for now I think this wraps up our Substance Painter tutorial. Please let me know if this was helpful for you, what you'd like to see next in Substance Painter. I'm happy to cover anything from material ID maps to normal map baking, from high poly to low resolution geometry. I love talking about this stuff, as you can tell. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I hope y'all are having a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.